morning, everyone. Okay, what I'm going to do is just give a brief overview of the Austroads guided road design. Now, actually, I think we just got a little bit of problem with the presentation there. It's cutting off the screen. So, just in this session, what I'm going to do is just give certainly an overview of the Austroads road design series, and I'm going to particularly just have a look at a few issues in parts 3 and 4 of the series, and then quickly have a look at what we're doing in main roads with regard to using the Austroads series. But just up front, I just want to show you at the complete Austroads level what has been happening. About 4 years ago, Austroads embarked on a program to deliver 9 guides across many of the disciplines in the road arena. And you can see the ones written up there, and for each of those, a whole series of guides were published. And the one we're interested in here the most is road design, although certainly traffic management, I'm sure some of you would be interested in that as well. Now, certainly within the road design, all guides are being published and are available on the web. There's also a new guide being developed at the moment for tunnels, and that's being project managed by Ricky Cox of the Transport and Main Roads Department. Now, the guide to road design structure itself, we have 8 parts. The first 2 parts are introduction and design philosophy. Parts 3 moves into big block geometric design. Part 4 goes into intersections. 5 is on drainage design. 6 is on everything outside the roadway at the sides. 7 is on geotechnical investigation and design, and 8 is on design and process. Now, I will go through each of these through this session. Now, on the Austroads road design panel, there's various organisations represented, including all the state and territory representatives, of which I'm the Queensland representative. We've got New Zealand in there as well. We have the Association of Consulting Engineers Australia, the Australian Bicycle Council, the Australian Local Government Association, and that's the panel makes up those members. Now, in developing the road design guides, the source material, a lot of the existing Austroads material you've seen in the previous Guide to Traffic Management series, and also the Guide to Road Design series, a lot of that material has been incorporated into the new guides. On top of that, where some of the state road authorities had additional information, or better and more up-to-date information, that was incorporated into the Austroads guides, and in addition to some other work as well. Now, what was agreed to from all the states right up the front was that each state will begin to use the Austroads guides, and in fact at the end we hope that every state will just use Austroads guides. But to do that we have to come up with a transition strategy to go from existing, in our case, road planning design manual to the Austroads guides. And I'll speak a little bit more on that later. How we're promoting this is that one of the ways is ARPA doing training courses. There's been mainly 1 course held in each state, except for Queensland we're doing 8. 4 have been delivered so far, and there's 4 remaining. Now, if you wish to use the Austroads documents, if you go to the Austroads website that's given there, you can have access to the documents. Now, unfortunately for anyone outside the state road authorities or local road authorities, you actually have to pay for the documents. And it's something that I've been pushing at the Austroads level to try and get these things free to everybody. Currently that's is not happening, but nevertheless with the road design panel we're still trying to get these things free for everybody. So I can't guarantee that will happen. Now, with the new guides, some of the format we decided on when writing them was that the The body contains the bulk of the design criteria, so the body of each guide, with the appendices containing additional information, and the commentaries providing supplementary and background information as at times where do the criteria come from. What we wanted to do was put material in one place only and not duplicate. And we've done that by using a high degree of cross-referencing. Another difference from previous Austroads guides is we don't have a separate guide for pedestrians and cyclists. The relative parts of geometric design for pedestrians and cyclists have been brought into the relevant part of the road design series. For example, on-road bicycle lanes has been put into part 3. But in saying that, that was agreed up front that the pedestrian and cyclist requirement shouldn't be separately because designers weren't using that sort of material. Even though we've changed and gone to this route, the bicycle people have decided they still like their own guide, so they've actually gone back and actually taken all the bicycle material and put it back into a separate guide or a separate reference. It's not for road designers, but it's a separate reference for them. So we couldn't win no matter which way we went on that issue. Now, with parts 3 and 4, which is the bulk of the geometric design criteria, we've tried to keep the body of the guides clean such that all the values in there are suitable for new roads. That is the normal design domain criteria. So values generally only applicable on existing roads, for example, brownfield sites, we've put in Appendix A, typically things like extended design domain. So in that way, we try to really have a different area for the different criteria. Now, where we get into design exceptions, unfortunately, I couldn't sell the idea at the Austroads panel level at this stage that there is such a thing as design exceptions, where we can't obtain criteria in the road planning design in the Austroads series. Certainly in brownfield sites, we can't always get the criteria. So what should we do? It was decided at the time that design exceptions, we just stay silent on it. Interesting, the last panel meeting I had in Adelaide, I again raised the issue of how do we treat design exceptions, and particularly how we design for roads and brownfield sites, and all of a sudden there was a lot of interest in it. So I'm hoping over the next year or two we may actually be able to come up with criteria for when you can't get a parameter, you can't even get an EDD value, what do you do? What sort of things should you look at and how do you justify it? So it was felt that the panel said at the last meeting that we should do something on that, and it's envisaged that perhaps additional appendices to these guides might be produced to look at that. So just quickly going through the parts. Part 1, called Introduction to Road Design, just goes through a few road design philosophies and principles. For example, context-sensitive design. Part 2, Design Considerations, goes a little bit more into the design philosophy, touching on things like the normal design domain, extended design domain. Part 3, Geometric road design, is all the geometric road design for the big box situation that's away from intersections. The sorts of things in there would be typical, what you'd expect to be. And this is a fairly hefty part, almost 300 pages. What I want to do is just give you just a few snippets now in part 3 of what's different from what we might be used to in Queensland. And one of the things, unfortunately, there's a lot of definitional issues we lost out on. Things like design lane width, how we define vertical curve radius. And another one is how we define batter slopes. In Queensland, we've always used 1 on X being the horizontal, whereas majority of the other states actually turned it around the other way with a ratio of X horizontal to 1 vertical. So, for example, what we would call 1 on 6 is now written in Austroads as 6 to 1. Now, we weren't particularly happy with that in Queensland, but unfortunately we lost out on a fair few of the definitional issues. What I'm going to try and do next time is actually go and recommend that be 6H to 1V, so it's a little bit more clear for anyone reading it what dimension refers to what, and some of the American documents do it that way. Now, one thing over at Road Design Manual that there is more information on, and that's on-road bicycle lanes. And there's been a fair bit of material taken from Vic Road Cycle Notes and RTA Bicycle Design Guide, and that material has been put into the Austroads series. Some of the other bigger changes is there's been numerous changes to the sight distance models. For mid-block situations, we have reintroduced a 1.5 second reaction time for alert situations. So typically, urban areas where drivers are likely to be alert, we can go back and use that 1.5 seconds, rather than the previous Austroads value, which was a minimum of 2 seconds. And that is actually based on research to be able to justify the use of that time. Based on work done by Sandra Lenny here in Queensland, who works for us, there's been a number of the eye and object heights have been changed to suit the modern vehicle fleet. The previous Austroads guide, a lot of the values were based on 1970s vehicles fleet. We've actually gone back, measured the new heights. We have things like 0.8 metre tail light height, up from 0.6, headlight height 0.65, down from 0.75, and top of a car 1.25. And even that top of a car still allows an extra 210 millimetres to the top of a 15% old vehicle, so you can actually recognise the car at that height. Sorry about that. There's also changes to the sight distance model is the deceleration values we use. Previously we had one set of deceleration values depending on speed for all road types, regardless of whether you had a motorway or the lowest volume rural road. You still needed the same value of sight distance for a given speed and reaction time. What we've done now is given three values of deceleration for different circumstances. For example, 0.26 is a desirable value for motorways and freeways and major highways. That's not a minimum value, that is a desirable value where your terrain fits. So don't think you have to get that value on those road types, but where it fits, do go to a value in that order. 0.36 is desirable minimum for most urban and rural road types, with 0.46 a value for where you're really struggling to get something to fit. Some examples there are mountainous roads or where you're sighting over barriers. You can go to a higher deceleration rate. And we now have deceleration rates at a constant speed because that's what the modern vehicle performance shows, is that regardless of speed, the modern vehicles brake at a similar rate. We have new criteria for sight distance over roadside safety barriers. Anyone here that's tried to design with the previous criteria may have found that it's quite difficult to achieve criteria around, especially on interchanges around safety barriers. There's been new criteria placed in Austroads to try and achieve a more practical solution. And another thing Austroads says is sight distance criteria for trucks is always checked. Rather than just some desirable criteria for trucks, we are really now pushing the idea of designing for trucks everywhere. In part 3, another change is adverse crossfall, the criteria that we use for that. It's a little bit less conservative than what it was, because for the majority of the speeds now where you're using adverse crossfall, we will go down to use half the value of the absolute maximum value of side friction. We have new criteria for sag vertical curves, and this is based on a Vic Roads approach, modified to the new sight distance models. And more or less what it's showing is that for less important roads you can get away with sharper sag curves than what you typically would use on a major motorway. So similar philosophy for what we've used for crest vertical curves and stopping sight distance. Into Part 3 in Appendix A, we have the Extended Design Domain criteria. This is the values for Extended Design Domain. There's some new material on cross-section widths in there. And at the moment, some of the cross-section widths for the rural road part is still under debate. We have stopping sight distance. It's been adapted from Chapter 4 of the Road Planning Design Manual, but there have been significant modifications made to the Extended Design Domain criteria, such that it looks quite a bit similar now to the normal design domain in the way the format of Extended Design Domain is presented. So hopefully it will be a little bit easier to use than what it was. There's also additional criteria in the stopping sight distance area. So that's just there's quite a few more changes to Part 3 over what there is in the Road Planning Design Manual, but that's just a snippet of some of the changes in there. Leah's asked there, one of the other issues is with definitions is how we define vertical curves. So vertical crest curve, typically in Queensland we've always used an R value of radius. It was decided at the Austroads level that it was only Queensland that did that, and there was one or two other states that went a bit both ways in which values, which definition they used. It was decided that they will go to K values. Now, K value is just the radius divided by 100. In Queensland, it's very likely that we're going to change as well and start defining it by K values to be consistent with the rest of the country. Generally, the principles we're going to use for whether we're swapping over or not is if we must have good reason why not to follow the national practice. And in that area of defining the K value, I can't think of a good reason why we shouldn't really go with the national standard. Now, Part 4 is intersections in crossings, and it's a general catch-all of information across intersections, roundabouts and interchanges, as well as having some pedestrian, cyclist and rail crossing material in there. What's been introduced is more information on bus lanes. That's generally taken from Vic Roads and Western Australia material. We have more information on providing for bicycles. A lot of that is taken from, again, Vic Roads and RTA. Now, Part 4A is unsignalised and signalised intersections. And that's a fairly hefty document. It's based on the previous Austroads Part 5 with a reasonable amount of material from our Queensland Road Planning Design Manual. Just some changes in Part 4A. Is 1.5 second reaction time for alert situations, the same as mentioned earlier. Again, the new constant values for coefficient of deceleration, they also apply to intersections, as well as the new eye and object heights. We've also added for approach sight distance at intersections. So if we're coming up through an unsignalised intersection on a new road, that approach sight distance is a desirable criteria. We haven't said that it's mandatory. So if you're designing a new road, try and get approach sight distance. It's quite a conservative parameter to try and get. If you can't get it, and provided you've got sufficient cues through other means, we don't have that any longer as a mandatory standard. Sight distance of property entrances. We use minimum gap sight distance and extended design domain for safe intersection sight distance, and that's pretty much taken straight out of the Road Planning Design Manual. At the national level, the new warrants for the different turn types of unsignalised intersections has been taken from the Queensland work. So the current warrants we have been adopted. The only slight change is where the values come down at this end, at the right-hand end of the graph. Queensland, we had that levelling off at 3 vehicles an hour. It's been increased to 5 vehicles an hour. So there's a minor change. Another change, that the seagull treatment that in Queensland we call preferred, which was the bottom one there, where you had a merge on the through carriageways. We copied RTA and said it was preferred. But what happens when we spoke to RTA, they said, well, we generally don't do it that way. We generally use the top treatment. So it was decided to swap those things around to say that where your right turning volumes on the minor road are not particularly high, it's preferred that the top treatment gets done, and the alternative treatment where you've got a merge on the through carriageway is mainly for where you might have very high right turn volumes on the side street. And again, more material in this section on how to provide for bicycles. In Appendix A of Part 4A, we have the extended design domain for intersections. We have the new site distance criteria, which has been again reformatted to make it look much more like the way the normal design domain is set out. I won't go through the others there, but there's also additional criteria, some from our road planning design manual, and there are additional ones that's been created as well. Part 4B is roundabouts, and some of that material has been taken from the road planning design manual, some has been taken from the previous guide to traffic engineering practice part 6. Some of the new criteria in there, against what we've got in our road planning design manual in Queensland, is a new table on minimum central island radius. I won't go into how that was derived, but it basically has been derived from some of the work undertaken in Queensland from the roundabout safety study. Another criteria that's been changed at roundabouts is we've actually dropped the deflection criteria at roundabouts, which was a maximum radius of 100 metres through the circulating carriageway. That's now been dropped in lieu of entry path curvature, which is a maximum radius through the entry path of the roundabout. Many of the countries overseas have been using such an approach. The UK have been doing this, I was informed actually not that long ago, since 1981. I thought it was more like 1993, but apparently the UK have been using entry path curvature from at least 81. So we've eventually caught up, and there's been some new criteria developed based on our Queensland roundabout safety study to define that entry path curvature. This little diagram here, I won't go through how to determine the entry path curvature, but there are diagrams in there that show you step by step how to do that. As well as the other intersection types in mid-block, we also have additional information on how to provide for cyclists through roundabouts. This one here shows a concrete splitter island as an alternative to separate at the entry and the exits the cyclists from the motorists. We couldn't get any consistent approach agreed to how to get cyclists through roundabouts. So what was presented in the Austroads guides in Part 4B is a number of options available to designers without actually saying which one would be the best. So we tried to get agreement even from the bicycle lobby, the cyclist lobby, to say what's the best way to get through, and there's disagreements all around. So what was presented is just all the options. Part 4C is interchanges. And the term freeway mainly gets used across the country, and that's the term that's been used in Austroads. Another change from our road planning design manual is the acceleration and deceleration lengths for ramps are now based on the same acceleration and deceleration criteria as given for intersections. So they're now consistent between intersections and interchanges. Another change is the site distance criteria to exits over what we've got in our road planning design manual. It was felt, particularly from Western Australia, that it's important that the start of the taper of an exit can be seen. So criteria was developed for that. And where you've got an exit that's not parallel, simple exits, we decided on a time of 10 seconds of being able to see the start of the taper all the way through to the exit nose. And then where you've got a parallel lane, because that parallel lane aids additional Q as to the exit, that value has been brought down to 7 seconds visibility from the start taper right through to the exit node. So 7 seconds must be available throughout that length. And again, there's more information in there on bicycles and freeways. And this diagram here shows me one method of getting cyclists across the entries and exits. Now, part 5 is drainage design. That was one of the earlier documents put out, and some of the feedback we've got is that it really doesn't provide enough information to enable the design to go into a full drainage design. So even though there's useful information in part 5, it's one of the first documents at the Austroads level we're actually going to review. So as for next financial year, this document, we're going to review it and update it. Part 6 is roadside design, safety and barriers. This is another document that, because of the time frame we had to get these documents out, isn't really, it leaves a lot of options open to designers, and it needs to be sorted out a little bit more. So this is another one of these documents that's going to be reviewed fairly quickly and start of next financial year, there's going to be a review of part 6. Part 6A is pedestrian and cycling paths. Now this is pedestrian and cyclist paths off-road, so it's all the off-road criteria for pedestrian and cycling paths. And a lot of that material again is being taken from RTA and Vic roads, as well as some of the material out of the old part 13 and 14 of the Austroads Guide to Traffic Engineering Practice Series. 6B is roadside environment, and is a little bit of a catch-all of everything that's off the roadway. For example, your road furniture, lighting, off-street parking, there's a bit on landscaping and rest facilities, there's material in there on services, as well as some environmental issues. So it's a little bit of a catch-all, that chapter of that part. Part 7 is geotechnical investigation and design. The intention of this part is not for an expert in geotechnical issues to read, it's for designers to read to get an idea of what geotechnical issues might be important. So it's not meant to be a specialist document, but it is meant to be a document to be used by road designers. And the last part there is process and documentation, which is a generic document covering what sort of processes we typically use in road design and what sort of documentation. What each state is likely to do is come up with their own documentation and processes that fit under Part 8. That is more specific. So that's a very brief overview of the Austroads Guide to Road Design series of all 13 parts, 8 major parts. Now just to finish the session, I just want to go through a couple of slides on what we're doing in Queensland to transition to the Austroads document. As I mentioned earlier, it's intended that eventually all states and New Zealand will use the Austroads document. But originally there will be some differences. There will always be some differences. For example, New Zealand has seismic activity, which we're probably not as interested in Australia. Northern parts of Australia will have extra criteria on design for things like cyclones, how to allow for that, which the southern states won't be interested in. So there will be some minor differences that will form supplements in each state. We have to actually put together that companion document to show where we differ from Austroads. And in Queensland, we're likely to call that the Road Planning Design Manual, a guide to Queensland practice. Now the wording in there, a Road Planning Design Manual, the use of that was deliberately left in there because there's a lot of legislation that points to the Road Planning Design Manual currently. And if we change the name, it means that a lot of the name and a lot of legislation has to change. So we wanted to try and leave that name in there. Now, because Austroads in those 8 major parts has about 1,800 pages, that's a very hefty document. There's a lot of time and effort required to actually map what's in there against our current practice. And it is likely that a fair bit of time is going to be needed to actually map that correctly. Other states are moving a lot quicker with it than what we are. We're really struggling to find resources and time to do it. So, because of that, what we've actually done is, most of you may be aware that we've actually released an interim guide to road planning design practice in Queensland. And in that we've actually said we've given you a little bit of guidance on what to do in the meantime. And what we have said is, generally we still stick with the road planning design manual until we come up with this companion document. There is a number of exceptions in there, like the new site distance models. I mentioned the use of the adverse crossfall. There's a number of the new extended design domain values. We've said go straight across and start using the new Austroads values. But otherwise stick with the road planning design manual. But we did say though that if Austroads gives you a better answer and it's more fit for purpose in a particular situation, feel free to use it, but just document the use of a value in Austroads. If it's different to our road planning design manual and it's less conservative, document it as a design exception. So what we don't want you to do is feel that you can't start using the Austroads document, but just document it as a design exception in the interim until we come up with our companion document. We've also said in the interim document that Austroads has additional criteria, particularly for HOV lanes, bicycles and pedestrians, which is better than what we've got in our road planning design manual. So we've said that can be used as a reference. So table 1 is the table that actually gives the new criteria that we recommend you go straight to for new road design schemes. And table 2 gives criteria where we say that Austroads has better information. If there is any conflict, the road planning design manual takes precedence in that table 2. So just in conclusion, the entire 13 parts of the Austroads Guide to Road Design series are published, available now on the website. It is intended that these will eventually be each state's main document for designing. In the meantime, we've produced an interim document just giving a little bit of guidance on what to use in Queensland, and the final companion document, hopefully within a few months we might be able to make a start on that, but eventually we will come up with that companion document. So thank you very much.